Solidarity and shalom, comrades. Welcome, welcome. For those watching later, uh, thank you for tuning in. And for those who are going to be watching live, I also thank you. Today, I am here with Comrade Tommaso, our
Hi,
Italian, hello, our Italian communist friend. Can you introduce yourself, Comrade Tommaso, for those who haven't seen you on here before?
I am a member of a communist youth organization in Italy, and I am a communist and a patriot. I humbly call myself a patriot. I don't know if I have the right to say that, but I don't care. But yeah, today we will talk about Italian anti-fascism, which is a very important topic because uh, as fascism was born in Italy, so anti-fascism was born in Italy. It was born as the the it was the response of the people to the fascist the fascist movement.
Yeah,
And
we can see how that turned out historically. We can see what side won there. Um, So history has vindicated the anti-fascists in Italy. I can say
of,
that much.
of course. And I we should probably start talking about I don't know, maybe the movement, the clandestine anti-fascist movement in fascist Italy, but I would like to focus more on the years of the resistance and the civil war. But we should probably start talking about the clandestine movements.
Right, right. Because what a lot of people tend to forget is that fascism took power in Italy in the early 20s. Like this wasn't something that happened in the 30s later, like in Spain or in Germany. This took root very early. And early on, it was a lot of people didn't know what to make of it because fascism was such a new thing, and it was very up in the air. And people like the Italian communists and the Italian socialists and the Italian Republicans and anyone left of liberal was really under immense pressure early on in the regime, and it eventually came to the point where there were no more illusions and they jailed everyone. And that includes great thinkers like Antonio Gramsci, who wrote the brilliant prison notebook prison notebooks in fascist Italian prison for being a communist. And so this started very early. And as Tommaso said, it was clandestine at first. They couldn't openly pick up arms and declare war against the fascist state. It was very oppressive, and the conditions for that just weren't there. And we know how the conditions arose for armed struggle. It was a world war. But
Yeah.
I'm gonna leave that topic up to you. But something happened in between the World War and the beginning of the fascism in Italy, and it was the Spanish Civil War, right? And Italian anti-fascists have a deep relationship with that conflict, like many international anti-fascists did at the time, didn't
Yes.
they?
3,000 Italian anti-fascists were recruited by the Communist Party, the Socialist Party, and the Republican Party to go and fight alongside the Republicans in Spain. And there were also some anarchists that fought Catalonia. Yeah, in how?
Catalan. That was right. You said it right.
Okay.
Um, you're trying not to say it like an Italian, I know. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, Catalonia, where there was a huge anarcho-syndicalist movement, and actually members of the same international anarcho-syndicalist movement. Um, there was a huge strata of them in Italy, and many of them earlier in the century had immigrated to the United States and helped found the IWW, the International Workers of the World. It's giant anarcho-syndicalist union that was the only red union to ever exist in the United States. So, thank you, Italian anarchists, for helping us out with that. And they also, though their tactics in Catalonia, I think, were detrimental to the war effort against fascism, I still commend everyone who took up arms against fascism and fought for what they believed in. And
Yeah,
Spain was the battleground. It was the first place where anti-fascists really tested their mettle, and
of
unfortunately, it was a loss.
we if it wasn't for the Garibaldi battalion, we probably we wouldn't won. We wouldn't have won at the Guadalajara or Jarama, or I mean, those battles were won by the Republican side, mostly because the 12th the 12th brigade was there, and the Garibaldi battalion was there. I
Oh,
mean,
for those
it's
who
not.
don't know, the Garibaldi battalion. Who the heck is Garibaldi, and why was he a figure to unite around for Italian anti-fascists?
I should probably talk a little bit about this. Garibaldi was one of the protagonists, of the main characters of Italian unification, and he was a Republican, a socialist, and yeah, he is. I think that most people in Italy don't remember is that he coined an expression that was later used by communists. The so-called he said that socialism is the son of the future, and that expression, the son of the future, was used like a lot in the 20s, in the 30s, after the war. Even now, we still use it. And that expression comes straight from Garibaldi.
Wow, socialism is the son of the future. Is that what he said?
Yes,
Wow, that's so cool. And not a lot of people know that. Well, Garibaldi was doing his thing in the late 19th century too. Socialism was not popular at that time. It was a brand new idea. And so he was extremely radical, and not a lot of people know that about Garibaldi, because he did end up being a pragmatist, and he did end up allying with the royalists because they were fighting against empires, right? They were fighting
yes,
against empires to unite Italy at this time, and this is the late 19th century, the late 1800s, and there wasn't some mass socialist movement to help them at this time. It was just him and his red shirts, really, and he couldn't do that on his own. But he's a very, I would say he's like the Simon Bolivar of Italy, And now today in Latin America, you see a lot of left wing socialists and communists and anti-imperialists use Simon Bolivar as a figure to unite the whole country around, and to unite, people beyond just beyond ideological views, a uniting figure. And even if you have to rehabilitate that figure historically, like, I think it's a good idea to have some historical figure to unite around. I think we have, in the United States, we have a lot of people that we can be proud and unite around. Um, People like Fred Hampton and Harriet Tubman, Crazy Horse,
yeah,
John Brown. We have a lot of great people that, like, wow, that's an American fucking hero right there. John Brown, that's an American fucking hero. Harriet Tubman, my goodness, what an American hero. And so I think that there's some things that transcend ideology, and I think that that uniting force of someone like Garibaldi was essential to uniting in the united front against fascism in Italy. I really think so.
yes, yes. And okay, so now what we talk about. We should start directly with the civil war, the actual partisans, or should we talk about the arrest of communists in Italy, the strikes, I don't know. What should we talk about?
Well, there was a point. Um, we can talk about all this. Up until the war, I'm sure. Right? There was fight back and fight back, like you were saying. All the communists were rounded up, the socialists were rounded up, even the Republicans were rounded up, even liberals, even a lot of liberals were rounded up and put into prison or worse. Um, and like I said earlier, one of the famous victims of this was Antonio Gramsci. Um,
Yeah,
while he was sitting in prison, Leon Trotsky was touring the country with his friend Mussolini.
yeah.
So, and
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 another
yeah, go
thing I
ahead.
want to say is that the fa- in June of 29, 33, 37 communist members of the party were arrested and jailed. And I mean, this really show how much fascism feared the communists, how much he feared the rage of the workers.
Of course, the same happened, across Europe. Who were the first targets of the fascists? Always, it was the communists, because they were terrified of the communists. They had seen what the communists were able to do in the Soviet Union, and it shook the ruling class to their core, to the point to where a strata of the ruling class decided to seize power and create and manifest this historical phenomenon that's known as fascism.
Of course.
And they're terrified of us. They're terrified of us. And you know what? They were right to be terrified of us, because who destroyed fascists in Europe? Who did it? The
Yeah,
glorious Red Army during the Great Patriotic War. They are the ones who destroyed fascism. The partisans, Tito's partisans, the Italian partisans, the French partisans, the Dutch partisans, the German partisans. These are the ones. The Allies came in a year before the end of the war to take credit so they could have a seat at the table. The United States could have a seat at the table in Europe. They just didn't want to see Europe go red. That's the only reason they joined the war.
of course. That's the only reason. Like, yes. And I think that I would like to talk about is that during the war, the first real example of resistance to fascism happened during a strike in Turin on the 1st of May 1942. And oh no, it was no, sorry, it was the 5th of March 1943, because that was the biggest strike. It was like 100,000 workers of the Fiat Mirafiori, always in Turin, that uh, they basically went up against the government, against the war, and the government was decided to give them something like to keep them in line, but they didn't really. They made some concession, but it wasn't like much better than before. So like it was a very big strike, I know, but it was not like the it didn't really solve anything.
It was like a yellow union strike, so we like to make the distinction in America between a yellow union and a red union, and I think the colors make it obvious. The yellow union is the union that will stop. They'll accept concessions from the state, They'll accept that. The Red Union won't stop until they get everything, like until they get what they're demanding. And yeah, this massive strike, as you said, it was Fiat workers, right? The car
Yeah,
company. They made
yes,
tanks and motorized vehicles for the Italian army. So these people striking in 1943, 100,000 of them, that's
yeah,
literally stopping the production of vehicles in Italy.
of
That's
course.
detrimental to them. And wow, the workers are powerful. Just look at the strength. No wonder they bought them off, right? No wonder they
Yeah,
bought off the workers, because if the workers actually if the union leaders didn't, accept concessions, they could have literally brought Italy to its knees from behind the lines without raising a single rifle. They just stopped building their fucking weaponry. It would be
yeah,
detrimental to them. And imagine if, like, the Beretta factory workers followed in suit, right? Um, it would have just destroyed the Italian war machine, and that's why they bought them off, and that's why making the distinction between yellow and red unions is so important. And this is in the midst of a war, and this is in the midst of, the Italian partisans are fighting for their lives and trying not to be fucking murdered and hiding from the state. And 43 is also the year that I think
uh,
when did they invade Sicily? Was that
yeah, and then the government fell in it was like August 1943. I don't remember now no, it was wait 25th of July 1943 when the Mussolini's government actually ended, and he was put in a state of arrest. And
Yeah, yeah, and then that's when the Nazis actually ended the monarchy and
yeah,
created the Italian Social State, I think it was called.
Social
Or the
Republic.
Yeah, it was called like the Italian Social State or something like that. And
Yeah,
it was straight up like
yeah, it
basically a puppet state to Germany, and it was set up like a national socialist fascism, like the most evil fascism you can think of.
yeah, they call themselves Republican fascists, which I mean doesn't make sense to me. Doesn't.
No, that's just their anti-democracy, so it doesn't
Yeah,
make sense.
and okay, so we are in 1943, and 1943 is the real beginning of Italian resistance, and the reason for this is a date which is the 8th of September, when the Italian Italy officially stopped being an ally with Germany, and start to be a co-belligerent with the Allied forces. And so this means that the Germans now occupy most of the peninsula, and they commit crimes against the population. And you have all those soldiers that have been left without clear orders, and they now have to choose between siding with the Germans and go fight in the Italian Social Republic, or become partisans. And many of them became partisans, and their military experience was fundamental for the victory of the partisan movement. If if
Very
it wasn't,
interesting. And I think you're talking about the soldiers and what happened in 1943, and I think there's this film you showed me, and it sort of reminds me about, well, what about the soldiers that were isolated and away from Italy during that time, like the ones in the Mediterranean, for example, on small Greek islands.
yeah,
And there's this film that you
the,
showed me. I think it was based on a
yeah,
true story or something. Of
the
Italian
Czechoslovakia,
Italian soldiers, just losing contact with
yeah,
the homeland, and none of them are fascists or anything. They're just sort of Italian guys. And it's a very interesting film.
that film was. I mean, that film is nice, but it's not it's very much edulcorating the reality. The reality was that the soldiers trapped in Cephalonia were killed in en masse, the so-called Cephalonia massacre of the Acqui division by the Germans. It was a real massacre, and I mean everyone was killed, and they were made no prisoners.
Wow, and these are their supposed allies? My goodness.
Yeah.
It shows you just how fucking evil National Socialism is. How Nazis were just like I don't like to throw that term around a lot because I think it's very subjective and it doesn't really mean much. But I think I can safely say that fucking Nazis are evil. Yeah, fuck them. It made it and you know and that's what really kicked up the partisan movement to 100. This sort of such an anti-human approach to things that the Nazis had and that they imposed on people and even their supposed allies. And look what
Okay.
happened.
And I mean, and this which I just told is the real beginning of resistance. And we should probably talk a little bit more about the region in Italy where resistance was more fierce, which is Piedmont, which is a region in the northwest, and it is very interesting because the Piedmontese working class was not concentrated in big cities. Was dislocated in suburbs around the big cities, which were in contact with the farmers, with the peasants, and so this sort of working class solidarity was inevitable. And this is very interesting because those were the perfect material conditions for the developing of a working class movement first and of anti-fascist movement later.
And I think there's a very famous song that comes from this region because of that culture that was built there, wasn't there? That actually
Yeah,
is very relevant to the Italian partisan movement.
well, yes, this is the most famous song of these times. Is of course Bella Ciao that everyone knows for that fucking money heist. I hate that show. Can I say that?
What'd you say? Yeah, I'm sure you can say it. You can say bad words.
Okay.
This is not a children's program.
Okay, so you're talking about Bella Ciao. Bella Ciao was born. Yes, it was a partisan song, but first, before that, it was a a working song sung by the so-called Mondine, which were these girls 15 years, 16 years of age that were recruited by landowners to work in the rice paddies, in rice fields across Piedmont, like in Vercelli, Novara, places like that. And their life was horrible. They had starvation wages. They were constantly at risk for malaria, and they were probably yeah, probably many of them died during work, and yeah, and and they were the basis for the workers movement, for the peasants movement in Piedmont and the rest of northern Italy. If it wasn't for them, socialism, the idea of socialism would have never like developed in the years of late 1900s, early um, early 20th century. and they were many of those girls became like partisan couriers. Like um, they like brought messages or food for the partisans. They were up in the mountains, and yeah, so like that figure of the Mondina was very important. Was of course
Literally girls, little girls, fucking the bravest people I can think of.
yeah,
Oh my goodness, having to live under and work under those conditions, being exploited to the extreme, having no agency of their own, but deciding even with their limited strength and their limited means to still help
yeah,
those fighting for justice, and in turn fighting for justice themselves. Now that is some of the most brave thing I've ever heard in my life, and it just goes to show the power of youth and the power of the power of youth and the power of working class solidarity. It can change the world. It really can.
of
And
course.
this uniting idea and figure created a culture that created the most militant, hardcore, and badass of all of the partisans in Italy. Tell them about what the Germans had to do to keep control of these people.
I mean, in all of northern Italy, the German stationed 7 division. Only in Piedmont, of those 7 divisions, there were four. So, like in Piedmont, in only Piedmont, there were 4 divisions. And like, if you
Four
need
out of
four,
the seven divisions had to be in Piedmont.
if you need 4 divisions to keep in line one single region, you clearly have a problem. You clearly have a partisan problem. Yeah,
I think we have a partisan problem.
yeah, of
Yeah,
course.
there was quite a partisan problem because by 1945, a certain Il Duce didn't make it out okay, did he?
Yeah, and another thing I would like to call it is one episode it really I really think it's indicative of the situation. You have this commander, this partisan commander, which was not was a Republican. His name was Nuto Revelli, and he was in charge with blocking a German division to pass through a street, a road in Piedmont to go like in France and fight against the Yanks. And so this road, I checked on Google Maps. This road is like a little more than 100 kilometers long. You can like with a car, you can do that in 1 hour, maybe, no, maybe more. I don't remember. And like the Germans took 8 days to pass through that road because the partisans were there at every moment, every turn of the street. With hand grenades, submachine guns, and
It's
like
like
making it impossible for the
it's like the 20th century Thermopylae, right?
yeah,
Like what the Greeks did to the Persians. 20th century Thermopylae, you bottlenecked them and made that 100 kilometers of hell.
yeah,
Oh, that's beautiful. That's anti-fascism right there. And I think it's important to talk about like where anti-fascism comes from and what it means, because especially in America, it's getting distorted by liberals at this point, where it doesn't mean anything anymore. And it's almost embarrassing to be associated with like anti-fascist action, which is
yeah.
mind-boggling for
I mean,
anyone who people who are historical materialists who see this are like, why is this happening? And but I think for us to really get back to our roots and understand why anti-fascism was even a thing in the first place, we have to really understand these stories and these histories. from the original anti-fascists, and who are not the original anti-fascists, but the ones who saw it rise first in Italy.
Of course, of course.
So, what ended up happening? What was the fate of the partisan movement towards the end of the war? Because we know that the Yanks invaded Sicily, and they started coming up. And on D-Day, actually, on June 6, 1944, they came into Rome, which is little known because it was also on D-Day during the D-Day invasions of Normandy. So people don't really know this, but on the same day, Rome was the fascists were kicked out of Rome. And so, like, by 1944, you have the north of Italy is being controlled directly by the Nazis and being bunkered down up there, and the south has been lost to the Yanks. So what's
Yeah.
happening at this point?
No, I would like to say that the liberation of Rome started way before the Yanks came, because the Germans, after the war, the German general that controlled Rome, after the war, said that Rome was the capital, the European capital that gave the most problems to the Nazis. Not like Paris, not like Athens, but it was Rome, because every day in the waters of the Tiber, you had Germans' bodies floating, dead, completely dead, floating on the the on the river, and I
Fritz,
think
go home. Fritz, go home, or you'll be floating in the Tiber. Just like back
uh,
in the Roman days, they used to pull out bodies from the Tiber.
yeah, and there were also attacks, partisan attacks with bombs. The one which was the most important was at Via Rasella, which costed the lives of 30 or more German SS from the Bozen division, probably, yeah. And that was the moment when the Yanks knew that they could attack Rome, because they could rely on the partisans to do the dirty job for them, to kill the Nazis in Rome while they were attacking on the front.
Absolutely. What a lot of people don't realize is how actually integral all across Europe, not just in Italy, but all across Europe, the cooperation of the partisans behind enemy lines with the advancing Ally forces and Soviet forces. Um, it happened in, one of the detrimental ones in 1944 during Operation Market Garden, when the British, which was a failure in the Netherlands, when the British and the Americans did their joint armor and airborne attack there. The Dutch partisans kept telling them, guys, you have like giant fucking panzer divisions, and you can't handle this shit with just paratroopers. Watch out. They kept telling them, and the Brits didn't listen, and the Americans were isolated, and it was an objective failure. But look what happens when they actually listen and cooperate with the partisans. Well, they march
Yeah,
into Rome with little to no resistance because the partisans had done the job. So there you
of
go.
of course.
Partisans
Okay.
were nothing to laugh at. Soviet partisans were a massive deal. Like in the woods, it was a bunch of Jews and communists who created these partisan groups and were fucking menaces. They were a menace to the Germans. And there's actually a really devastating film called Come and See, a Soviet film. I think everyone has to watch it to understand why we're anti-fascists. Come and See is a true story. Dramatized, of course, but it's one of the most violent and horrific films. I don't recommend you watch it just out of nowhere. It's very horrific, but I think it's an essential story of why we're anti-fascists and why we're so militantly against fascism. Not just as me as a Jew, or as a communist, but just as humans.
Yeah, right. And I forgot to say that of those 32 that was killed in the Via Rasella attack, other um yeah, other 110 were the wounded. So in the altogether it was 156 victims against 11 partisans who organized the attack.
Yeah, I mean, there you go. And it shows how integral the partisans were to liberating Italy.
Yeah,
But by the end of the war, what happened to the partisans? Most of them were, left wingers and stuff. Why was
yeah.
it? It seems natural that it would have been similar to the Second Spanish Republic in its composition post-war, but did that really happen?
Um, mm, I mean, after the war, many communist partisans that fought and were injured during the civil war were arrested because they were communist, and the new government didn't like them, and many of them were stayed in jail for years. And another thing that happened was that those wasn't arrested discovered that the new government wouldn't charge the fascist criminals and the responsibles of massacres, and so they decided to do it themselves, like to go find the criminals and kill them, without the yeah, kill them of their own accord without the law saying anything. And this group was called the Volante Rossa, and they were stationed in I think it was Milan. I don't remember. And uh, they were most of them were arrested and judged as criminals, while those fascists were still in freedom and untouched by the bourgeois justice system.
This sounds much like Germany or West Germany
Yeah,
post-war. The part of Germany that was controlled by the capitalists uh, didn't really persecute Nazis outside of the top ones, but most Nazis integrated back into politics and daily life pretty easily, and were part of those governments for a long time. Um, and to this day, like, it's just okay to be a fascist in Italy. Like, you're allowed to be a
okay, now wait,
person.
uh,
You're allowed to.
technically, constitutionally speaking, you're not allowed. But in the practice, no one is going to say anything to you unless you act you start making fascist salutes on the street, or dress like Mussolini, or if you do stuff like that, you are going to get arrested. But if you says I mean, even if you spread propaganda or false interpretations of history, that in favor of fascism, you probably heard about how Italian neo-fascists like to say that Mussolini drained the swamps around Rome, and I mean, every it's not false, but it's not entirely true. I mean, that was. We should probably talk about that in another live stream.
Yeah, we could go into these other concepts about Italy and its history to other live streams, but I understand what you're saying, and really I think that what this comes down to is that uh, anti-fascism is a response to a real material historical phenomenon, right? And we can see historically how that played out and how anti-fascism of those tactics was not only correct but victorious in its methods. And ultimately, you know, fascism as a real material thing in Europe collapsed. Now there are reactionaries that get called fascists. There are all these people. And I feel like that in the West, especially, anti-fascists, people who claim to be anti-fascist, are not really focusing on fighting anti-fascism, but are focusing on fighting reactionaries and conservatives. And that's not really anti-fascism. And it's not really the purpose of even forming that kind of group to attack these types of people. And I think to that point, what they're doing is they're not attacking a fringe ideologies of the ruling class. They're really attacking, you know, a lot of the values of the working class. And without I think that people need to make a distinction between, you know, yes, these are reactionary ideas. We don't want them to take hold. Conservative ideas, we want them to be left in the past. But we cannot treat these ideas like they're fascism, because fascism ultimately is this form of violence. And anti-fascism is a form of violence in reaction to it. And conservatism isn't a form of violence, though violence is used to maintain it sometimes. But if we react to conservatism with violence as it is some form of violence, or reactionary ideas as some sort of violence, then that's not anti-fascism, really. That's just a violent reaction to reactionary ideas. I think that when did the Italian partisans begin fighting? Whenever the material conditions arose, whenever the fascists were there, and whenever the fascists actually existed. Like, you can't fight an abstraction. You can only fight a historical phenomenon that takes hold. And fascism, by definition, needs state power to even exist. So I think that we really need to make a distinction. I'm not saying we shouldn't combat reactionary ideas. We should. We should combat liberalism, reactionaryism, conservatism, but we shouldn't treat it like anti-fascism. I don't know what you think about that, but
Okay, so in your opinion, what should an anti-fascist do, like today in 2021?
in what? Say that last part.
No, in today in 2021, like
Well, an anti-fascist should first and foremost be organizing for the working class and trying to create politics and policies for the working class, so they don't, you know, and try to create a position clearly so they don't feel compelled by fascism in the first place before it actually takes root as a historical phenomenon. We need to you know, be able to reach the masses better than fascists do.
yeah,
Because if we just go around violently attacking people we suppose might be fascists, we're just going to alienate people from us. Look what has happened. Look what has happened in the United States. The Antifa is considered like a terrorist thing now. Like, anti-fascism is considered terroristic by most Americans. Now, that's not what it's about. Like, yes, the anti-fascism in times of war uses terror against fascists, but there's no fascist state power in the United States. It's a reactionary, imperialist, genocidal piece of shit state. Don't get me wrong, and it should be destroyed. But it's not fascism. Fascism is a very historical, very specific historical phenomenon that arises out of a certain strata of the working class when capitalism is on its dying breath. It's a fear of socialism. It's a reaction against the working class masses. And
first, before you said that you can have anti-fascism without fascism, but I would like to say that you can have fascism without socialism.
well, yeah, I totally agree. Fascism to exist only needs to exist. Like, fascism is a strata of the working class trying to preserve capitalism. That's simply what it is. It's a very, very desperate attempt at. It's a very short term, desperate attempt at preserving capitalism. Notice it's always short term because it requires war to function. It requires war to function, and well, eventually, either your country just loses the war, becomes so tired of war that the people do a popular uprising, and
Yeah, I mean, yes.
the Spaniards had North Africa. They always had North Africa up until the 70s to up until the 70s. They had Morocco. They had that external enemy. They're always fighting there, always producing weapons, always building up their police state. And Germany, you had Lebensraum and the Jews and the communists, to always keep building up. In Italy, you had the restoration of the Roman Empire, Nova Roma. Um, and like fighting in Ethiopia. That, like, if it wasn't for World War II, they would have continued in Libya and Ethiopia and Somalia. They just would have continued. And so I think you really need that external enemy, and it's different than just regular imperialism, because it's naked aggression, right? It like the United States, they use a lot of soft power. Yeah, they send troops there, but today it's not so naked. It's not like it was back in the early Cold War. It's changed. Things have changed. But this is beyond the scope of the discussion we're having right now.
Yeah.
And I really didn't, even think about these concepts very much before talking about them. But what I do want to say is that we really need to look at the history of anti-fascism to really understand where we are as anti-fascists, and why never again do we want this to arise, and why we are so militantly against it. But we also need to be able to recognize it, because if everything's fascism, then nothing is fascism.
Yeah.
And we really need to be able to distinct it from our other, ideological enemies. So we can know what tactics are best to combat it, because the tactics against fascism aren't the same against conservatism and reactionaryism or liberalism. We have to use our tactics accordingly. And I just want to thank Comrade Tommaso for coming on and talking about
Anytime you
Italian fascism. Is there an anti-fascism in Italy and the Italian partisans mostly? Is there anything else you wanted to say before we ended this one?
bash the fash.
Bash the fash. That's right. Thank you, everyone the few people who did come in and watch live. I appreciate y'all. And thank you, everyone who's watching this later. Much appreciated. Like it, and share it with your friends if you think it's cool. Also, Comrade Tommaso will probably come on again in the future to talk more about Italian stuff. So that'll be fun.
Yeah.
Much solidarity, shalom, and see ya, comrades. Bye-bye.
Bye.